Okay, here's one. There's only one picture. Sorry to say, I can add some more, but this one's important. This is the United States map over Rome's territory. And this, can you see it? So it says the Roman Empire in the time of Hadrian, 117 to 138 AD. Remember 138, that's a very important number. True, the Roman used not only the sword, but the word. But he commonly used it for the same purpose, not to enlighten the mind, but to move the will. Thus, when he had conquered Greece and was confronted with her higher culture, young Romans streamed east to study. Not to study speculative philosophy or even logic, but rhetoric. For rhetoric was useful in the practice of law, on the hustings at election time, and in the army when troops must be persuaded to face death. When rhetoric, an ambitious Roman could force or deceive a judge into returning the judgment the advocate desired, or persuade the mob to vote him the power of office, or incite a man to kill his foe, provided that he carefully concealed his Greek education, which was un-Roman. As Cicero's dialogues make clear, rhetoric enabled a man successfully to flatter the powerful and crushingly to insult the powerless. The high dialectic that illuminates Plato's dialogues never reached his ardent admirer and plagiarist, Cicero, who may well have shared the opinion of a character in one of his own dialogues that this sort of conversation is tactless. What Cicero admired in Plato was his mastery of rhetoric. The Greek drama of Sicily had interested the Romans. In consequence, Plautus and Terence, though neither was a Roman, wrote light comedies in Latin, imitating or adapting Greek models and trying to evade Roman censorship by laying the scene not in Rome but in Greece. These comedies reflected the fact that the Roman, like his contemporary in the Greek East, preferred the comedies of Menander to the Aristophanes. Just as in tragedy, he preferred Euripides to Aeschylus and Sophocles. Indeed, Rome would never have tolerated anything half as subversive as the comedies in which Aristophanes mocked war in the midst of the life and death struggle that his city was waging against Sparta. But even light comedies soon tended to give way to less strenuous entertainment, especially to a sort of musical comedy tempted by striptease. Where drama and amateur athletics had once made Athenians one, Rome was made one by horse racing, circuses of exotic animals to gape at, and that most Roman of all entertainments, gladiatorial combat. For a people whose history had been almost continuous warfare, skill in combat furnished popular heroes, and the sadistic pleasures of mass murder stimulated a people who worshipped force and liked to witness the pain or the death of others. Besides, this was no mere Greek fiction. This was the res, the thing, the realis, the real thing. In return for Greece's gift of drama to the Romans introduced the gladiatorial combat into the Hellenistic world, which at first shuddered at it and finally learned to like it. Meanwhile, Roman spectacle continued to adapt the subtle creations of Greek imagination to the Roman love of reality. Under the empire, not satisfied to reflect on the ancient myth of the Minotaur, Rome displayed in the circus a real bull copulating with a real woman. During the late Republic, Greek poets did incite a few Italians to rival them, even while lamenting in their poems the poverty of the Latin tongue. Roman poetry, or at least Romanized Italy, produced a great lyric poet, Catullus, Roman enough to celebrate the body rather than the spiritual charm of a Roman femme du monde. His poems were marked by exultation at conquering her body, by anger that she has conquered his. The famous paintings and works of sculpture the Romans saw in Greece apparently did not move him to paint or sculpt. He carried them off to Italy as plunder or commissioned Greeks to copy them. As to architecture, Rome desired the huge and the ornate buildings that did not, like those of Athens, invite tentatively and reveal their charms gradually, but would impose, would daunt, and would dwarf man. To achieve these effects, a Roman builder would always commission a Greek architect and make his orders clear. The Greek outburst of mathematical and scientific genius in the 3rd century failed to incite Rome, which never in her history produced an important mathematician, and which enslaved or hired Greek doctors for use at home. When a Roman general took to the Greek city of Catania, he found there a sundial and sent it as plunder back to Rome. It didn't incite the Romans to make other sundials. Indeed, it stood in Rome for 96 years before the Romans discovered that, at the latitude of Rome, it was accurate. Rome's real failure was apparent by the time of Augustus. She did not know how either to love or to inquire in the same sense that Athens had known. Her repeated deportations of Greek philosophers and the debauchery she learned when she plundered the Greek world testify that on one hand she rarely inquired about her ends, but only about the best practical means for reaching them, and that on the other hand she lacked the disinterestedness that might have enabled her to love rather than to seize. In his fashion, Augustus recognized these limitations. He had the swords, he had the men, he had the money too, but to restore domestic peace fully, he wanted to make his power lovable. He tried 3 notable methods. First, Augustus tried to revive the ancient gods of Rome. Decades earlier, Catullus had turned from celebrating sensual love to the horrors and brutalities of the civil war between Marius and Sulla, and had written, "Thus right and wrong become confused. Mankind in darkness, bewildered now, ignores the gods. Never again do gods return to earth or walk with men in the bright sun of the noon." Augustus was said to have been, like most members of his class, a religious skeptic, but he was a true Roman and wanting to conscript the gods if a show of piety could hallow his government and bring Roman stability. Since the days when Catullus lamented that the gods were dead, there have been 2 more bloody civil wars: the war between Caesar and Pompey, and the still more demoralizing war between Augustus himself and Antony. Augustus therefore set about an ostentatious restoration of the ruined temples of Rome. He chose the title Augustus, presumably because it had religious overtones. No genuine religious revival took place in Rome. In the Greek East, men began to set up altars to Augustus, as they had done in the case of Hellenistic kings ever since Alexander the Great, and of Oriental and Egyptian kings before that. In Italy, Augustus carefully deferred to the Roman Republic hatred of monarchs, but with the armed forces responsible to him alone, and the revenues of Egypt reserved to him alone, this ostentatious deference to the Senate deceived none but those, and they were numerous, who were determined to be deceived. As for the power of the plebeian assemblies, these had largely withered away. Meanwhile, the Roman family, in which originally the father exercised powers of life and death over his whole household, was in decay. Divorce was frequent, wives were rebellious, and the rich were refusing to have children since rearing them cost money. Always a Roman, Augustus made strict laws on such matters, though he himself had divorced and remarried, and his daughter had later to be exiled for participating in a youthful orgy in, of all places, the Forum. The orgy showed signs of youthful defiance against the hypocrisy of the Augustan political settlement and the traditional moral stuffiness of Roman gravity and decorum. On the whole, the emperor's laws failed to work. Augustus hoped that the poets could also make power lovable. Virgil tried to oblige with the Aeneid, a magnificent literary epic that painfully betrayed the difficulty of the problem. Horace was subsidized and momentarily turned from his naughty poems on love and his charming ones on daily life in Rome and the delights of a place in the country, which his services to the regime had bought him. Religious skeptic and sexual voluptuary that he was, he wrote in support of religion and morals. So in other words, he was a heathen writing about morals. Several other poets were approached, but only half-heartedly backed up Augustus's propaganda. Indeed, Ovid wrote of the gods in a spirit of positively Greek mockery and ended up in exile on the shore of the Black Sea. On the whole, the effort to make power lovable, similar to the effort to disguise Augustus' will as the will of Jove, failed. Augustus had another string to his bow. If he couldn't make power lovable with poems, he could at least hope to make its home beautiful to the eye. He was to boast that he had found Rome a city of brick and had left it a city of marble. But the cost of the army Augustus had tried to maintain, if he could guarantee internal stability, would correct and protect his frontiers long frontiers, made all the money scarce. His solution was to sheath public buildings that had been built of bricks in marble slabs. This was an operation not unlike sheathing his own will in the apparent wills of the gods, or making a luxury-loving generation behave more like their pioneer ancestors, or sheathing in beautiful poetry, joyfully praising his reign, the power that he had won ruthlessly, using men and women to force obedience. Even so, the facings he chose, the marble turned out to be easiest to apply, the easiest beauty to make more than skin deep. For all of Augustus' partial failures, the naked force of a military autocracy was decently clothed in layer after layer of gossamer. The ancient layer of religiosity inherited from the Republic, the much-touted layer of rejuvenated ancestral mores, the monarch's punctilious deference to the senatorial order, or to those of its members who had not already been killed, either in battle or by proscription, in 3 successive civil wars, the layer of artistic splendor that glorified Roman power, the layer of propaganda in the poetry of power. I'll try it again. For all of Augustus' partial failures, the naked force of a military autocracy was decently clothed and made to look good. Thus discreetly clothed force restored law and order within the empire, and rather successfully protected it from the lawlessness and disorder without. The frontier was pushed northward to the Danube. It was even pushed eastward from the Rhine to the Elbe, until the smashing defeat and destruction of Varus and his 3 legions caused withdrawal to the Rhine. Caesar's dream of defeating Parthia was discreetly abandoned, and a diplomatic settlement was disguised as another victory. It's a lot to read. We're getting there. The next chapter is one of the best.